Hi, everyone. My name is Megan Finnerty, and I'm here on behalf of the USA Today Network, your host of Coronavirus Conversations from Just the Facts Live. As always, I'm here at my home in Phoenix, and we're here because facts fight fear. And with the help of more than 5,000 journalists from across the USA Today Network, as well as experts from across America, we're here to empower you with things you need to know to stay sane and safe as we all navigate coronavirus this like time in our lives together. We're here to support you and not scare you. So, with that, I want to introduce you to today's guests. I'm excited because today's show is all about how to navigate the infinitesimal personal choices related to making good decisions while your state reopens. Every state is different, and there's lots of different choices each family and individual has to make right now. And our goal is to help you figure out how to weigh the pros and cons, the risks versus the rewards. We're going to start by hearing from Amy Peachy. She's a finance writer joining us to talk about money and resources. Marco De La Cava is a national reporter at USA Today. Timothy Lant is here. He's a professor at ASU who's been doing research on epidemiology and like kind of what's going on with the virus here in Arizona. I'm also bringing up his colleague. Sorry, I lost my place, you guys. I'm so sorry. He's here right now. Josh Lavere, I'm so sorry. He's also at ASU and has been doing research into how the virus is moving out here in Arizona. We're also going to hear from Devin G. Pope. He's at the University of Chicago and recently published a study on visiting restaurants and bars safely and less safely. And later in the show, we will also hear we have so many guests today. We're going to also hear from Dana Winters. She is with the Fred Rogers Center for Early Learning and Children's Media at St. Vincent College. You'll hear from her at the end of the show. We'll also have Dr. Peter Alperin here. Hi. He's going to talk to us about the future of visiting doctors' offices and really get to the heart of what's going on with essential versus non-essential services right now, how to make those decisions. So we have a full show and we're excited to have you. We're going to open up though with this idea right now of there really feels like there are two Americas. Like there are people who are going out and resuming business as usual and life as usual, and then there are others who are still sticking much closer to home. Marco De La Cava wrote a story recently with some of our colleagues at USA Today. Marco, let's just jump into it. Why does it feel like there's kind of two Americas, two realities?
Well, it's essentially because before we all had the same marching orders, which was basically stay home. As governors and even local municipalities have sort of tried to ease the reopening, there seem to be different rules. So you've got different rules combined with people with different risk level profiles. And the combination of those things means some people feel excited to go out and try and restart things, maybe safely. But other people are really still nervous about this virus and very much self quarantining like before.
Yeah, it feels like really mixed messages from state to state. Sometimes even like community to community, things are varying pretty widely. Talk to us. Your story involved some mobile phone data that was revealing like who's going where, what's really happening with the reopening. Talk to us about that.
Well, essentially, what it found, it was using cell phone, anonymized cell phone data that showed who was going out, leaving home. And perhaps not surprisingly, states on the coast like New York and California, where things have been locked down pretty seriously, there is less of the moving around. And in places like the South and Florida, there's been more moving around. Some other data that we uncovered that was backed up by some information from Stanford University suggests that there's even a political lines factor that folks who are in states that tended to have Republican governors or people supporting President Trump tended to be moving sooner. But that said, the spring back into normal life is still happening much more slowly than the lockdown happened.
Wait, what do you mean by that when you say that?
Well, essentially, when governors and the president at a certain point said we need to stay at home, that cell phone data shows that people pretty much listened and locked down quickly. Now that a lot of places are saying, hey, it's okay to go out, there's still a hesitancy among certain people to head out there.
Is there any upside to kind of like how things feel like they're changing right now, or any sort of like long range projections or things that you can kind of see like, well, what's changing about the way we're living our lives right now?
Well, I think the only upside is that cautiously you can try and resume aspects of normal life as opposed to literally being quarantined at home at all costs. Having said that, the difficult
Florida.
thing is you're going to bump into people who may have a different approach than you do. So you might be on a hike and you see someone coming, you put your mask on, they don't. There's a lot more of that going on.
Yeah, I definitely am seeing that in my own community, like, everyone trying to adjust to each other's sense of safety. And like
Right.
I was on the sidewalk this morning with my kid, and people, you kind of waved and then you decided who was going to go into the street.
Yeah,
And okay, that we can manage. Marco, thank you for your time. Please stay on the show to participate in
will
some of the
do.
other conversations we're having. Thank you for your reporting. I'm going to bring on Amy Peachy. She's a finance writer who has a story for us right now, which so many people are thinking. Thanks for being with us, Amy. As so many Americans are facing unemployment, furloughs, reduction in hours, talk to us about, I'm going to just ask it, what is a bad way to get money right now? Like,
Yeah, and a lot of people are really desperate right now because they're in between getting unemployment. There are problems with getting your unemployment checks right now.
oh my gosh, yeah.
Stimulus checks, so people need cash. But the one thing you really want to avoid is a payday loan. These are short or small loans, usually maybe a few $100s, and people turn to them because it's a quick way to get cash. You can get it to make your rent or your auto payment, and it can seem very appealing, but there are a lot of downsides to these loans. They have really high fees. The annual percentage rate can equate to almost 400% for a few weeks of a loan.
Wow.
And the problem is that often these then end up renewing, they keep rolling into new loans, and people can end up in kind of these debt spirals where they're really never quite able to pay down these loans. So, financial experts advise everybody stay away from these if you can. These are not a good idea. There are definitely better ways to find cash if you need something quickly. Your rent's coming up. There are other ways to find some cash that don't have those really high fees, high interest rates. And you
Which,
can look at those. Yeah.
oh, sorry about that. But that brings us to, I know my mailbox is filled with a lot of offers from credit card companies who are like 0% loan for 18 months or 12 months. Or I got one yesterday that had like a little fake check in it that showed that I was approved for $50,000. And I'm like, oh my God, right? Like,
Yeah. And these seem really appealing, right? It's like, okay,
I mean, it
my
looked like a
credit
check
card
made out to me for
makes like a
$50,000.
check. My credit card wants to give me money. What can be
Sure.
bad about that?
Mhm.
But there's some things you need to know about getting a cash advance from your credit card company. Number one is that they charge right out of the gate. First of all, you're going to have to pay a fee. It's usually between 3% to 5% of the amount that you're going to get in advance. And secondly, they start charging interest right away. So normally on your credit card, you charge something and you have a grace period to pay it back before they start charging you interest. And that's what a lot of people do. They'll buy something, they pay it back to the credit card, and then they're not paying interest on the amount that they borrowed. You can't avoid it though if you're doing a cash advance because they're charging you right as soon as you take that cash out from the credit card company. The interest rates are also higher than your typical interest rate on a credit card. They're usually in the mid 20% range. So that's high. So there are definitely better ways than a cash advance
And so
to get money.
let's talk about what are those good ways. Okay.
All right.
There is a light at the end of the tunnel.
Yeah. So one product that people are turning to increasingly are personal loans. And these can have pretty low interest rates when you compare to these other products, in the single percentage point range. They can be higher. It really depends on your credit score. So if you have a better credit score, you're going to get a lower rate. But these personal loans allow you to take out, maybe a few $1,000s. You can use it to fix up your home or pay your rent or whatever you need it for. But the thing that people like about them is that the company tells you what you're going to pay every month. So it might be like a $400 payment every month. So there's no surprises there. And that can often be a better way, a cheaper way than a cash advance or payday loan, a more predictable way to pay back that money as well.
And you said some credit unions are offering 0% loans.
Yeah, that's the other thing. Credit unions right now are offering very low interest rate or even no interest rate loans. I actually got one from one of my credit unions where I live, 0% loan for people who are impacted by the COVID-19 crisis. Wow. So if you qualify, which means to qualify, you have to be a member of the credit union, usually have a good credit score, they're going to do a credit check. That's a great way. I think it was up to $5,000, and that can be a good way to get cash without incurring high fees or other downsides.
Well, I know your story ended with maybe like the most obvious thing, but it still surprised me to see it in print where you were like, well, look around at what sort of high dollar items you have. Like you mentioned, I think like ski-doos or, ATVs, extra cars, like things of real value that maybe you're just not using right now or that you could live without.
Yeah, and that can be a hard thing to sell or decide that you're going to part with. But if it's something that you're not using, like a ski mobile or an ATV or even a car, a lot of people aren't driving right now. It can be a way to get quick cash. I had one financial advisor tell me that he was talking with one of his clients who said, I need cash quickly. And he said, well, you have like a couple cars and you're not using one of them right now. You should sell it. So that's a better way often to find some cash. Jewelry too is another way to find some cash. That obviously is personal. That can be very hard to decide to take that step. But in that way, you're not going to incur interest or get into like a debt trap.
Amy, what I really appreciated about your story, though, was that it really helped think about like you are having an in the moment crisis right now with cash, maybe. But the choices you make can impact you for months or years, depending on the choice you make, like right this second. So I think that's a very like sobering, helpful context is like, don't panic and do something rash about a problem today that could follow you for years.
Absolutely. And one of those things I just want to point out quickly is a lot of people often turn to the retirement savings, and that's something that can impact you for years. It can seem like a great choice, especially now the CARES Act eliminated the 10% penalty that if you have a hardship distribution, if you're under 59 and a half. So that can seem very appealing, but you do want to think about that long-term impact. By the time you get to your 60s or older, you're going to need that money. So definitely think twice before doing that.
Amy, thank you so much for your advice and your thoughtfulness. We appreciate you being on the show today. And remember, if you thought what Amy was sharing was helpful and interesting, share this show with your friends. Take the little link and post it to your Facebook, or if you're watching this, wherever you are, just share it out. Like, let people know we're giving you good advice and helping you make some decisions about managing risk. Now I'm going to bring up Devin Pope. He's a professor of behavioral science at the University of Chicago, who recently, hi Devin, worked on a study about really assessing your personal risk when you go to a restaurant or a bar. And let's get right to it. Which places are riskier than others?
Yeah, it's a good question, and one that lots of people want to know. So some colleagues and I, like Marco early on your show, we use cell phone data to see what types of places have a lot of people that are kind of all milling around and create a lot of potential transmission risk. And within the restaurant and bar category, we find that some of the most potentially dangerous places are those places that are sit-down restaurants, so places like an Olive Garden or an Outback or a Cheesecake Factory. These types of places have a lot of crowds and you end up staying a long time. And so the number of potential transmissions that you have is very high. And so some of those places can be more dangerous than other restaurants where you go in and out very quickly, like fast food and or McDonald's. And so you see a lot of differences across these restaurants.
That it makes intuitive sense, but I do appreciate you sort of helping us make that decision more black and white. What's a bad way to go to restaurants? Your story had some advice about it isn't just the restaurant, it's how you visit and it's who you visit with.
Yeah, for sure. So part of what makes a restaurant risky is the number of people and how long you stay. It can also be who you bring with you. So I don't want to get too kind of in the weeds with the math here, but imagine you go to a restaurant with 4 people, you and 3 friends. The number of unique interactions that take place among you 4 friends is 12. There's 12 possible combinations between you and your friends.
Okay.
That you go with 8, so 7 of your friends. So there's a party of 8. Well, now the number of unique interactions is 56. So it's more than double the risk if you double the number of friends who are with you. So that's not always intuitive to people, but the risk increases quadratically, or it increases more than you would expect as you add more and more members to your party.
That is sobering. And I know it can feel hard right now because people are thinking, oh, I've been trapped for 2 months and now I can go out. And psychologically, you feel like you can go back to your old life, which would have been call your friends and go out to lunch. But you're saying that carries a lot more risk than it did 2 months ago. I want to ask you, what are things restaurants can do to help keep us safer? Part of your study, I'm sure, also looked at some best practices or choices we can make.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of creative solutions, and we're seeing a lot of businesses that are doing these creative ideas. Of course, moving things outdoors and creating more spacing within your establishment. One thing that I think in general is we're thinking about is as a restaurant owner or as a business owner, you might think the best thing I can do is kind of ignore this virus and pretend it's not around. So I don't want to make people feel uncomfortable. But that might be the exact wrong thing to do. You're probably better off making it clear that no, we are taking this seriously. We are wearing masks. We're setting up things in our establishment that take this seriously. We're not just ignoring it. By ignoring it, you're maybe actually making it more salient and scary to people.
That's interesting. I appreciate that thought. I'm going to ask you to stay on the show because our next segment is all about ground rules for basic errands. So I'm going to bring up two professors from ASU, Tim Lant and Joshua LeBaire. Thank you guys so much for being on the show today. Hi.
Hi.
We're gonna get right into it. Tim, you were talking earlier about your decisions. Like, how are you deciding to protect yourself? Because I think so many of us watching right now are literally saying, "Okay, but what do I do?" So, walk me through. You said recently you decided not to go get breakfast.
Yeah, that's right. So I'm a modeler. So I'm also interested in data, and I look very closely at transmission patterns. So exact conversation we're having, we recognize if we go to a restaurant, if we go to a bar, what are the transmission patterns that would look at it? And I'm a person too. I like to go to walks. I need food. I engage in self-care, and all of these things are data for me. So the other day, I went for a walk up one of the mountains here. We came down, and I was with my family and wanted to get some breakfast. And one of my favorite restaurants was across the street, and I decided to go get food. I walked across the street and immediately saw that there were lines of people. No one was wearing a mask. Everyone was within a foot or two of each other. No one was social distancing. And every patron of the restaurant was engaged in similar behavior. The people at the restaurant did have masks, but they weren't wearing them properly. And people were sharing menus. They were around their necks, and so they weren't going to be effective in stopping any transmission. And so I made the choice of stopping what I was doing, turning around, going across the street, and going home and making breakfast because I decided that it just wasn't worth the risk for me. I think a lot of people are going to have similar thoughts as they go through this. Everyone's going to see similar situations. It's a combined effort by businesses and restaurants that want to be open with patrons that go there because the patrons also have a responsibility to limit transmission. There's no such thing as zero risk anywhere that we're going to go from now on. And we're aware of that, and that's okay. But we can still limit risk pretty significantly. So my advice is to pay attention to surroundings, understand that these are very personal decisions, and also that this is something that we need to do together. We all need to create safe environments where we can go out and enjoy our lives again and get the economy opened up. And it's going to be a joint effort.
Well, I do appreciate that, which is a natural segue. And I do want to mention to our viewers, Josh and Tim are on the show today because they were actually doing modeling for the state of Arizona, helping to track how the coronavirus was spreading through our state. And so we really picked them. We're lucky to have them on today's shows because they were doing like exactly this research for this, at least the population I'm a member of. So with that, thanks for doing the work. But Josh, you were talking about individual risk assessments and like what should we personally be looking for. So let's pull up that list of things you guys mentioned are best practices.
Right. Well, I mean, I think what we're all recognizing now, it's not just about when things open up, but how things open up, and how do we do it in a safe way so that we don't excessively spread this virus and put ourselves and the people we love at risk. So things that you look at when you go to any place of business, certainly a restaurant, would be, are other people wearing masks? One thing that we've learned very clearly is that actually masks are working pretty well. If both people are wearing masks, there's very low likelihood of the virus spreading. When there are no masks, then droplets are coming out of people's mouths just by talking. And those droplets spread many feet. And if they get inhaled, then they can spread the virus. You want to see social distancing marked on the floor, and you want to see where people are standing or sitting separated by the 2-meter distance or the 6-foot distance that we've been talking about. There have been documented publications of a patron at a restaurant spreading virus not only to members at the same table, but at the tables that were nearby. And so you'd like to see that tables are spread apart so that at least if you know your party's safe, you're not going to get the virus from in nearby parties. Staff should be wearing masks, and you want to see them wearing them properly. I think you just were speaking to Tim about that. They should be covering the nose and the mouth. If they're kind of below the nose, there's droplets coming out, and staff should be wearing gloves. And if you see them not doing this in public in front of the patrons, you can bet that behind the scenes, it's not. Yeah. It's even worse. You want to see signage posted with safety protocols. This gets at what Devin was talking about earlier, which is the notion that, people acknowledging that this virus is here and that we need to be aware of it, that, we're not going to pretend it's not there. Touchless takeaway and paying by phone are certainly much better than having to touch things, because we know the virus spreads on surfaces and other people touch them and bring them up. And of course, you want to know that people have been hand washing. Limited capacity, restaurants that are packed the way they used to be, it's just not going to be safe. I would turn and walk the same way Tim did. So presumably there would be less chairs and tables, and they would be spread further apart. Unfortunately, in the summer months, perhaps more outdoor seating that's spread apart could be done. Not so much in Arizona, unfortunately. No. That's our season for being indoors, but in other parts of the country, that may be possible. And then where that's not possible, putting up shields, as your photos showed earlier, that prevent spread from person to person. All that would be helpful as well.
Well, thank you for that detailed and thoughtful list, because these are the kinds of things you really do feel like you want a checklist, some way of helping you make this decision. I'm going to bring up our colleague Marco Della Cava. He was talking to a proprietor recently just about how he was trying to make these decisions. Marco?
Yeah, I spoke to a gentleman in Southern California in San Clemente, and he had opened his restaurant back up, very popular place by the beach, and people flocked back. He was very eager to keep things safe, but what he basically told me was that people kind of take things, and run with it. So he said he hired extra security to try and keep people apart. That had a limited effect. And in the end, the police came by and had to sort of warn him. And he said, look, I don't know what I can do. I've told everyone to, stay apart, but they seem very eager to be close together. Nobody was wearing masks. So even the proprietor essentially was limited in terms of what he could do.
That is so nerve-wracking when you hear stories like that. Because restaurants aren't I went to the Home Depot and they were like, stand here, then don't do anything, right? Or this is the exact place you go in. But obviously restaurants function totally differently, and certainly bars.
I was going to say, you add a few beers in, I don't know how much people are going to listen to what you're saying.
I mean, it's true, which, thank you, Marco, for that, because that takes me to Tim, where you were talking about, this is also on us. You can make personal decisions to keep others around you safe. What do you think is kind of proper customer behavior right now?
Yeah, so that's a great question. So everything is going to look different, and we know that. I think what's most important is that the customer's behavior should show respect towards fellow customers and towards the business owners. And a lot of what that means is distancing and wear a mask. You can handle the majority of concerns simply by keeping your distance from other people in a respectful way, and wearing a mask if you're having, a conversation with someone who works at a Starbucks or a bar or restaurant or anything else. But, there's a lot of other things that we see in the environment too that we're also rethinking. So things like ATMs and gas pumps, parking meters, garages, crosswalk buttons, all of the different items that we touch throughout our day that we didn't used to think about. And we're all going to become really aware that these are things that we have to be careful in and around. So we have a lot of learning to do.
Yeah, I haven't, there's gated communities or your crosswalk buttons and stuff like that. And I keep using the end of a pen.
Right.
Sure.
A lot of us are keeping Purell or some kind of sanitizer in the car so that after you touch things, you can, wipe your hands down.
Yeah, I think that's really good. And I really appreciate you guys emphasizing it's on us too. We're in this together. It's not just about posting rules and following the rules. It's about you taking a proactive approach. I am going to get a little personal now. I want to ask you guys something that's coming up in the summer. We talked about families visiting one another. So for Tim and Josh, thanks, Marco. You don't have to answer this question if you don't want to. We're talking about planning visits to see people that maybe we're not currently socially isolating with. We know that there have been reports of some full flights, although I do think that was less common than usual. But many people are going to be thinking about family vacations, family reunions, seeing people you haven't seen in a while. And how do we help make these decisions? You guys made it sound like there's quite a list of decisions to make.
I mean, I think there's a lot of things to consider. So number one, of course, you want to make sure that your family member is not at significant risk. So if your family member has other illnesses, cardiovascular disease, hypertension, some of the things that we know put them at particular risk, then you may want to think twice. Assuming that they don't have those things, then you want to ask, how can I be sure that I'm not going to bring the virus to this person? Because younger people may get the virus and not know it. So if you've been isolated well, if you know you've been away from things, and if you can get tested and you know that your test is negative, and you've given a few days from that test so that you know you're safe, then I think it's reasonable to get together individually with your loved one. I think that's a little bit better. Again, it's all about weighing the general risks that you have and that person has. If you're going to travel long distances, that's a whole other element, because now you're in airports, now you're closer to lots of other people, and you have to kind of take that into consideration as well.
We were being asked in a chat about multiple tests over a period of time. Can you? Because I know in some states tests are being much more readily available. Yeah. Is there some logic to, like, if I get tested 3 weeks in a row and I don't interact with other people, or is that kind of false logic?
Well, the virus has a 3 to 5 day incubation from when you get the virus until you start producing virus and people can get it from you, right? So, if you were to get tested every 3 days or so, you would have a reasonable chance of catching it before you had a lot of chance to spread it. Even still, if it were positive, that means that day you might have been spreading it. So you still have to be careful. But there are people who are advocating for sort of a 3-day cycle. Now, that's particularly for people who are more likely to spread it. People who
have public-facing jobs, I think you said. Oh, we might have lost him. Oh, Tim?
Yeah,
I don't know what happened. Yeah,
jump in. Josh and I have had this conversation before. So people with public-facing jobs, really, everyone has a number of contacts that they're coming into contact with on a daily basis. So I like to think about whether or not the things that I do change that. Am I contacting more people? And that is a measure of risk. So when you're talking about going to see mom or grandma or Aunt Sally or anyone else in your family that you haven't seen for a while, you just need to be mindful of the fact that you're picking up all of their contacts too. Everyone that they've interacted with for the last couple of days has an opportunity to go through this short asymptomatic period. So that's what you're going to get when you see them. So we all want to do this, but the more you're careful with limiting the daily contacts that are unnecessary, the easier it is to do the things that are important. Have contact with your friends and family in a safe way. And it's limiting those other contacts that aren't really important that gives you the most safety when you want to spend time with the people that truly matter the most.
I think that makes total sense to me. Is trying to figure out, like, who can you be in mutual quarantine with? Is that kind of a conversation people are having right now?
I think so. I think everyone's expanding their circles just a little bit, and people are prioritizing that because many people, that's what they care about the most, and that's what they want to do. Other people may care about being able to go back and, go to bars and restaurants or engage in some of the activities that they miss. So it's a little bit different for everyone, and that's okay. But choose the thing that are the most important. Make sure you're safe with the things that aren't that important to you, and that's the pathway through this.
You guys both make it sound so reasonable. So I appreciate that, sort of like, appreciate the sobriety and the thoughtfulness that you've offered us today. Thank you so much for joining the show. We'll ask you to stick around, but we're now going to go to Dr. Peter Alperin. He is with Doximity, which is a telemedicine organization, but he's also an internal medicine physician in San Francisco. Thanks so much for being here with us. I want to get right to it. We were talking about essential versus elective versus emergency surgery, because we know that people have only been having emergency surgeries right now. But when we say essential and elective, they're not like no big deal surgeries, right? Talk to us about that.
Yeah, no, it's an important distinction. So emergent surgery is the type of surgery that you have to have or your life is in danger immediately. But that certainly does not mean that that knee replacement that you have had scheduled or any other similar types of surgery is not important, but it is considered elective, meaning that you have flexibility on when you schedule and when you can time that surgery. But certainly it's not the right thing for patients to think that, and people to think that these surgeries are any less important, and hospitals are doing what they can now to try to get those back online.
That's probably very reassuring to so many people. But so my first question is for those of us who don't have like a pressing need, if it's a routine dental exam or a routine, you're getting your skin checked or your well woman's exam, and you don't have an urgent problem right now. What do you do if you don't want to go in? Like, talk to me about making some of these decisions.
Yeah, so the decision making is very similar to what other folks have been speaking about. It's really judging what the importance of the evaluation and then the risk that you might incur by getting that. So these days, the majority of healthcare providers have really switched towards more telemedicine options and telehealth options that will allow you to visit the physician or the dentist even through either a voice call or a video call. And this has taken the world by storm, certainly the country by storm. In fact, at Doximity, we created a dialer video product that's super easy to use. You just get a link and you can click it, and everyone can have that visit. Oftentimes, like I mentioned, a telephone call will suffice. And then if you have to, you can also use online portals. So for something where you just need a lab result reviewed, or you have an image that the doctor asked you to send in, you can do it that way. So there's a variety of different ways that you can get the same information, but not have to go to the doctor's office. And that works for a great many situations.
And you did mention there were some specific telemedicine tips I thought were really, really helpful, because there were a lot of things I hadn't thought of before, like find a quiet room, like what we're doing now, use earbuds, have good lighting so your doctor can see you. But I had one other thing. You mentioned physical exams, that doctors are doing some physical exams remotely right now. Can you talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, so as you mentioned, there are some tips and tricks that patients should think about when they're having that telemedicine visit, all the ones that you already highlighted, the lighting and the quietness. But when it comes to the physical exam, there are some things. So for instance, if your belly is hurting, one of the things the doctor's doing when they press on your belly is to see whether they can elicit the pain and where that location is. So what they may ask you to do is to stand up and, maybe stand up and down really quickly, or if you're able to, maybe, jump up and down and ask and determine whether or not that pain is still there. So little things like that can help the physician, or if they lift their arm and see whether it hurts in the position of things. So there are some physical exam things that the physician can do through a camera.
And you mentioned obviously like write down your questions, be able to write down the answers, because you don't get to print out a report, which
yeah, that's a really important point. Make sure that you've thought about your questions and that you do bring a pen and paper, because when the meeting ends, that the visit is over, and a great many physicians are not able to get you that information in another format.
So I want to close with a quick, we're going to talk about some basic precautions if I'm making a decision about, taking my kid in for a pediatrician's checkup or something. I just had a kid and I was like, gosh, the first 2 years of a child's life, nonstop doctor's appointments, but they're not urgent. And so what are some things that we should be looking for to like keep ourselves safe, or to judge whether or not our pediatrician's office is being rigorous?
Yeah, so if you do need to go into the office, for instance, to get those childhood vaccines, as you mentioned, or other things which simply can't be done through a video call, there are some things that you can do. Other folks have mentioned, bring some hand sanitizer. Also, call your office ahead of time and find out what their process is. They may have a separate door for going in, and then patients leave through a different door. They may even ask you to wait out in the car, and they'll call you on your mobile phone and say, okay, we're ready for your visit. Other things to consider are bring your own pen, one fewer thing to touch. Little simple things like that can really make a difference. And then, of course, come with a mask. Make sure that you are masked in the waiting room, because if you are in a physician's office, there is, of course, just always an increased likelihood of people being sick. And so you want to prevent against that.
I appreciate that, those concrete pieces of advice. Briefly, I want to ask about the future of all of this. Now that we've gotten used to calling a doctor and doing telemedicine, where do you see this headed?
Yeah, I think telemedicine is had its moment, and it's here to stay. The patients have really embraced the convenience and the ability to talk with their physician through the comfort of their own home. And like I mentioned, that's why at Doximity we've created an application to make this really easy, the dialer video. So I think that you're going to see this much more widespread even after the pandemic abates.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for your time today. I appreciate your good advice and your straightforward straightforward clarity there. We're going to close our show on a slightly different note. We've given you a lot of really intense, specific directions about how to keep your friends and family safe and make good decisions when you leave the house. But now we want to talk about how you can be the best possible neighbor, because at the end of the day, as all of our doctors, all of our experts have said today, we are in this together. And so with that, I'm excited to bring up Dana M. Winters, PhD. Hi, Dana. I should call you Dr. Winters. Dana wrote an op-ed along with some colleagues as part of for USA Today, and she is going to talk to us today about how we can be first responders for everyone.
So first responders for everyone. Hello, how are you? First responders for everyone means we share responsibility. As Tim mentioned earlier, it means showing respect, sharing respect with others, finding ways to approach others with kindness and compassion and empathy, even though we may not know what everybody is facing.
That is good advice. Talk to us about some bright spots. You and your colleagues were talking about, Fred Rogers always said, look for the helpers. Even in dark times, there's good things to be happy about or things to hold on to emotionally. What are some of the bright spots you've seen?
Yes, so when Fred Rogers said to look for the helpers, it's because looking for the helpers gives us hope. And a lot of those bright spots have given us hope. Things like watching people buy groceries for others who may be immunocompromised, or helping out a neighbor, giving blood. Recently, we had graduation at the college, and knowing that my students weren't going to have their graduation, I sent them all special themed cookies about Fred Rogers, so that they had cookies to eat during their graduation day that were from a local bakery that had just opened.
That's so sweet.
We've seen teddy bears in windows. We've seen art, chalk art from children, just giving everybody a sense of hope and a sense of kindness and neighborliness.
That is really, it's so personal, like we've seen the stuffed animals so that kids can have safaris, that kind of thing. I appreciate that thought. And definitely more signs on houses and like honking and waving. There was a graduate, like honk for the graduate. And I was like, I can't believe this mom wants people honking in front of her house all week, but I'm sure it made her kid happy. But you also said there's a few things we can do to help, that like there's like steps we can take that both make our community better and make us feel better. So let's talk about some of those.
Right. So there are steps that we can take. It's reminding, especially the children in our lives, that they're not responsible to fix this, that there are scientists and doctors who are working to find a fix. And the best thing that they can do is do things within their own way of giving. Shopping for those who may not be able to do that for themselves. Checking in with friends, neighbors, just a small moment, a phone call, a written letter. One that's really important is to challenge hateful words and challenge victim blaming. And this can be done across the board, making sure that everyone knows there's not one reason as to why this happened. There's no one place to put blame. And the last is, Fred Rogers had an idea around donation that everybody has something worth giving. So whether that's giving of your time, giving of your skills, your talents, your physical resources, that we can all do something to give to our neighbors right now.
Dana, thank you so much for leaving us on that up note. I appreciate the positive reinforcement and the good advice. And thank you for your op-ed.
Thank you.
Thank you. I'd like to thank all of our guests. We had a packed show today. So thank you to Amy, Marco, Timothy, Joshua, Devin, Dana, and Peter for sharing your expertise and your insights with us. But mostly I would like to thank you for watching. We appreciate your interest and we appreciate you choosing us. Stay tuned. We'll see you guys ongoing on Tuesdays as part of Coronavirus Conversations. And you can always keep up with us at usatoday.com/news. And you can find us here on Facebook or Instagram and keep up with our news. Hopefully we'll see you again next week. Stay safe.
Hey, thanks for watching. If you like this video, check out these other videos from USA Today to stay up to date with all the latest news.